Hello, good morning. We'll get started. There are still people kind of joining, but with one eye on time. We'll get going. I'm Ben. I'm the CEO of Born Social, and I'm your host for today's event. For those of you that don't know Born Social particularly well, we're a full-service social media agency, and we help brands from super fast growing startups to some of the most loved, most well-known household names. We help them with their social strategy, content, communities, influencers, paid social. This is the fifth in our series of online events, webinars, since we were all forced into our homes all those weeks ago. And every topic that we've covered to date has probably understandably been quite focused around what in the world of social has changed during the time of COVID-19. We started off in the kind of early days of March, April, looking at how tactically brands should be changing their strategies. As the pandemic was unfolding, we looked at content production and creation in isolation and in lockdown. And a couple of weeks ago, we looked at how e-commerce has changed in the last few months, which is a lot. All those are available on our website. But today we found it's beginning to set in. We thought we'd kind of take a bit of a step back away from COVID-19, away from the very kind of tactical day-to-day world that we've all been kind of living and working in over the last few months. Last year, we published some thinking on brand building in the world of social media, and that took, on the one hand, some of the kind of most timeless, most understood, albeit often forgotten principles of marketing and advertising, and it reapplied them to the kind of modern world of social that we operate in. And no exaggeration, for once we had thousands, tens of thousands of people download that research and come to us with questions, and we felt like it really helped move the conversation about social forwards. We've been asked to do an event around that thinking for a while, but the reason we felt like now was a good time to revisit it is in the past few months we've seen this huge shift towards digital and especially social channels like never before. Some businesses are launching and running exclusively online. For some businesses who have always been online and on social, there's just been a reprioritizing, and social has kind of gone up in importance to them and how they operate. Whichever kind of camp you fall in, we wanted to take this morning to kind of help you understand how to approach these new channels, and help you understand how new frontiers, new channels like social, most of the time still abide by the same principles of marketing and advertising that we're probably all familiar with. Callum, our strategy director, and who wrote the original research on this very topic, is going to take about half an hour to walk you through how we see things, share some current examples of brands we think are doing this really well, and hopefully give you a couple of practical frameworks, because everyone loves a framework, that you can take away and apply to your brands and businesses. We should then have about 15 minutes at the end for questions. We'll try and finish 5 to 11 if we can. So there should be a Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. Feel free to submit any questions that you might have, any challenges, any disagreements. We'd really welcome them. And we'll get through as many of them at the end as possible. And if we can't get through any questions, then the best way to get hold of us is we've got kind of an open email address, which is shout@bornsocial.co.uk. So drop us a note on that if we don't get back to you today. Goes without saying, we'll share the slides and the recording of this later today or tomorrow once we've kind of got it all downloaded and ready to go. And without much further ado, I'll hand over to Callum to take us through his thinking.
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Ben, for the intro. Thanks for joining again. Great to see so many of you here today. This morning, going to be talking about a very simple question, seemingly. Can you build a brand on social media? Spoiler alert, I believe the answer is yes, but I don't believe that many are doing it very well at the moment. And when we're talking about brand building here, we're really talking about the, I guess, classical definition of that term. Can you really commercially build a business using social media? And there's lots to this topic. It's been kind of fiercely debated over the last few years. But I think it's really important to be looking at this right now for a few reasons. Namely, as Ben mentioned, over the last few months, we've seen a huge increase in attention on social across all platforms and all age groups. It really does have the attention now. And that's caused a big shift that we've seen in terms of how brands are thinking about social. When Joe Wicks in his living room with a camera on a tripod can get more reach and kind of more impact than most brands could dream of. And brands like L'Oreal Paris and Garnier really leaning into this kind of social first way of producing content with celebrities, and are now running this style of content as TV advertising. I think what we're seeing is a big adoption of social as a lead channel rather than just a supporting place, which is a big shift. It's something that we've been perhaps moving towards for a few years, but the last few months have really acted as a catalyst for that. And I guess the reason that this piece of research originally came about, social media has reputational problems within the marketing and advertising industry. There's been a lot of debate about whether social can really be a place to build your brand over the long term. Often seen as a very tactical, short-term place that doesn't really have true impact on your brand, and has kind of had a lot of criticism due to that from the contrarians of the industry. And perhaps it's no surprise that is the case when we look at some of the language that is used around social media. Headlines like this: content is king, using hashtags for maximum exposure, engagement is the new marketing. It seems like when it comes to social media, for a lot of people, we throw kind of simple terminology out the window and talk in this new jargon. It doesn't do us any favors. And I saw this article last week from Mark Ritson talking about the new normal and kind of talking about what that means. He says, the anti-history rhetoric is all too common in marketing. We're a century-old discipline, desperate to burn everything we have discovered, established and applied, because a teenager in Ohio has invented an app called Flappo. Found this quite relevant for today, but also really aligns with how we think about this as well. It feels like when a lot of people think about social, they seem to forget everything we've learned about marketing, advertising, how brands are built, and that has caused many people to be approaching it in the wrong way. Because this is the truth, most social media is probably ineffective at building brands because it ignores the very basic facts about how advertising and marketing really works. And that's where this piece of thinking came from. What if we were to, build from the ground up? How kind of do a refresher on how brands are built, apply that to social media, and then build up again. Okay, this is how you should be approaching social if you want to build your brand. So that's where this came from, and that's what we're going to run through today. So going to kick off with a bit of theory, not talking about social in the first section, just doing a bit of a refresher on 5 rules of brand building. So I'd expect that a lot of this you've seen before, but I think it's always good to remind yourself and refresh on these things, and use that as our kind of basis. We're then going to apply that to social media. So look at what we know about brand building and look at commonly accepted social media best practice and see if they stand up together, do a bit of myth busting. And then the important part is, okay, if it's not that, this is what it is. So going to give you a bit of a framework to think about, this is how you should be thinking about social to build your brand over the long term. So that's the plan for today, and hopefully it should be useful. So kicking off with these rules of brand building. And this is the bottomless pit of theories and things you could look at, but we've kind of taken four key texts to use as a basis. So Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, not a marketing and advertising piece of work, more about kind of how the brain works and that sort of thing, but really relevant. The long and short of it, Les Binet and Peter Fields, seminal marketing text that really did change the way that that marketers thought about this stuff. This blog post from Kevin Simler, which potentially not as widely known as the others, but really did personally change the way I think about the industry. He doesn't actually work in marketing or advertising. I think he works in tech, but just has some really interesting insights about how advertising really works. And finally, the classic Bar and Sharp, How Brands Grow, which again really did do a lot of myth busting about how brands are built. So just going to spend 5-10 minutes giving a refresher on each of these texts. What are the main takeaways and how does that inform our view of how brands are built? So the first one, Thinking Fast and Slow. The best way to explain this is to give you a small little exercise. So do this sum in your head, 2 + 2. And then do this sum, if you can, 17 × 43. The way your brain approaches those two different sums is exactly what Daniel Kahneman is trying to get across in that text. That is the difference between system 1 and system 2 thinking. So 2 + 2 hopefully came to you pretty easily, pretty simply. That is your brain on autopilot. It comes to you very quickly, and it's kind of an automatic decision that you make. 17 × 43, if you could get there, is a more laborious process, I'd expect, unless you're a maths genius. This is when the brain has to think about stuff. It's more laborious and it's not automatic. And these are the two kind of modes of thinking that our brain has and how we go about day-to-day decisions. And this really informs how we should think about marketing, because when we're trying to influence this system 1 thinking, that's the brand building stuff. That's where we're trying to kind of get people to build those mental shortcuts about the brand and kind of automatically make decisions about what that brand means for them and why they should buy it. Whereas system 2, this slower, more conscious, effortful form of thinking, that's when we're kind of more the sales, activation, direct response style stuff, trying to kind of help make people make those purchase decisions in the moment. So today we're just talking about this system 1 stuff. We're not talking about how to sell products in the short term. We're talking about how to influence decision making over the long term, how to grow your brand. So it's system 1 that we're really thinking about trying to influence when we're talking about brand building. So that's Thinking Fast and Slow. The next thing I wanted to bring up was the long and short of it, which piece of work by Les Binet and Peter Fields, came out originally in 2007, I think. And there's lots of amazing insights in that piece of work, but there's one graph that gets shared more than anything. It goes in every single deck I create, I think. This is the relationship between those two things, so brand building and sales activation from a brand point of view. And the key insight here is that you can't build a brand over the long term by layering these kind of short-term sales activations on top of each other. You have to treat them differently. You have to focus on this kind of brand building, this long-term stuff, and then you also have to focus on the short-term sales activation stuff, and they work together, but you can't just do one. So short-term sales uplifts don't lead to long-term growth, and I guess their big insight was that you do them in different ways. So brand building has to be more emotional. You have to tell a story, focus on the brand, whereas sales activation is a lot more rational, product focus, information, availability, call to action. They're very different kind of styles of advertising. KFC, I think, do it really well. On the left, they're kind of big brand pieces that make you feel something about the brand. And on the right, just kind of price, product, availability, information quickly. These are the two forms of marketing working together, and they've got that in a really good balance. But this piece of work really kind of informed how marketers should be thinking about their marketing, and kind of what style of stuff they should be putting out and why. So that's long and short of it. Third thing is cultural imprinting. And this is that Kevin Simler blog post that referenced earlier. And this is just a really interesting piece of work. It basically puts forward the theory that a lot of the reason that great brands are great is that they exist in society as a thing that is kind of beyond the one-on-one relationship that people have with the brands. So he says, cultural imprinting relies on the principle of common knowledge. It's not enough for everyone to know it. Everyone must also know that everyone else knows it. How does this apply to advertising? For an ad to work by cultural imprinting, it's not enough for it to be seen by a single person or even by many people individually. It has to be broadcast publicly in front of a large audience. I have to see the ad, but I also have to know or suspect that most of my friends have seen the ad too. And what that means is that when you're in the pub, hopefully soon, ordering a beer, the beer that you order says something about you in some way, but you're not in control of what that says about you. So someone who orders a Carlsberg as opposed to a Guinness, those brands stand for something in society, and that's as a result of the brands they've built or the perception they have. And really, advertising, one of the key jobs of advertising is to influence that kind of public perception of the brand. So what this means is that brand building is about building that collective understanding. You can't be a different brand to different people. Kind of everyone needs to think the same thing about the brand, and that's where a lot of the power comes in. So just really interesting to think about in terms of, I guess, the shift towards personalization as a trend. Does it stand up with this? Fourth, growth through penetration. This is kind of one of Byron Sharp's key insights, that up until this piece of work, a lot of marketers would think about loyal customers as kind of a big lever for growth. Can we get them buying the brand even more frequently? But his key insight was that actually for big brands, most of their sales come from people who actually probably buy the brand once a year, or maybe kind of they're not buyers at all, but they might buy it on the odd chance. Most of their sales come from those very light buyers, and when you focus on loyalty and those heavy buyers, actually you're not getting broad enough. Les Binet and Peter Field in their work also back this up, showing that the brands who go broad and reach as many people in the target audience as possible are the ones who usually win. Doing loyalty is not a driver of growth. So what this means is that in order to build our brands, to grow, we need to reach all of the potential buyers of the category, not just focusing on the heaviest buyers, the people who buy it a lot. That's where you really kind of increase your brand. A final bit of theory before we move on, distinctive brand assets. So this is another thing that came out of Byron Sharp's work and the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. And this is about distinctive assets. So that could be a logo, it could be a color, it could be even a person like Gary Lineker with Walkers. It could be many things, but these are kind of mental shortcuts that exist in people's heads that link you to the brand. So they kind of remind you that it exists, and it's a distinctive thing that stands out from other brands. And these are really important. That was one of his big insights. It's not enough to just know the name of the brand. These distinctive assets work as shortcuts in advertising to increase that distinctiveness. And what we know is that these are absolutely fundamental to brand building. Like they're a key part of it. But they need to be reinforced consistently over the long term. So they need to be present in all of your advertising, all of your comms. You kind of constantly need to reinforce them, or you lose their impact. Lots of stories about brands who've changed logos, like I think it was Tropicana. When they changed their logo, they saw such a dip in revenue, simply because they lost that asset. They kind of screwed with it, and therefore their sales took a massive dip. People didn't recognize it as quickly. The advertising wasn't as effective. Just shows the importance of consistency here. So we've got these 5 kind of, I guess, learnings, the theory that we built this up of. System 1 decision making is what we're trying to influence. The long game requires these emotional fame building campaigns. That's what builds this equity. Culture imprinting, brands can't exist one-to-one. They have to exist within society as a thing. We grow by penetrating a broad audience. It's about reaching all of the potential buyers, not just the loyal heavy ones. And distinctive assets being really crucial to brand building. But we need to consistently reinforce them and use them properly. So we've got these 5 learnings. Like these are kind of, I guess, commonly accepted truths about how brands are built. And I'm sure you can start to see these actually kind of, I guess, go against a lot of the commonly accepted thinking about social media. So let's look at that. What does that change in terms of how people approach social? So the first thing is audience growth, which we have made steps to move away from as a big thing in the industry, but it's certainly still there as a thing that a lot of people look at. You know, we still see things like this: how to get free Instagram followers, 27 tips that actually work, getting this many followers in a week, how to get more likes on your Facebook page. As marketers, like we still do obsess quite a lot over page counts, the amount of followers on your page, the amount of likes. It is a visible kind of metric that people equate with success. But it's something that we need to move away from, and I'm glad that we are, but I think a lot of people still look at this stuff. Why is it important? Because when you stack it up against that learning that in order to grow, you have to go broad to your entire audience of people who could ever buy the brand, and compare that to the people who would actually like or follow your page on social, they're kind of the opposite things, right? So there's actually been some research done into this way back in 2012, comparing the people who buy a chocolate brand to the people who like a chocolate brand on Facebook, and you can see they're opposites, right? So the people who buy a chocolate bar, where the main kind of sales come from, most of them are non-buyers or light buyers who maybe buy it once a year, whereas the people who like the page on Facebook are the heavy buyers who buy it loads. And it means that when brands obsess over driving audience growth, they're focusing on those heavy buyers, and that's not where the focus needs to be. That's kind of a bit of a red herring. So if you're still measuring success on social by looking at the amount of followers ticking up, yes, that's a good indicator of those heavy buyers, that loyalty, that sort of thing. But it's not the thing that's going to kind of build your brand over the long term. So I think it's important that we kind of bust that myth and move away from audience growth. And the next thing is engagement, which is kind of a logical following from that. So this LinkedIn poll last week, which irritated me quite a lot. What KPI in brand building is the number one most important to increase? And the general public, well, not the general public, the marketing public, voted for community engagement as the main metric of success for brand building, which really got my goat. And the reason is, again, if our job is to reach all of the potential buyers in a category, if that's how we build the brand, and if followers are kind of the heaviest of those buyers, then the engagers are like an even smaller segment of that. They are the most loyal, diehard fans. And if we prioritize on kind of building all of our content to optimize for them, we're really missing the big picture. We are kind of focusing way too much effort on things that really don't move the dial in terms of brand growth. And there's been, lots of research to back this up, just showing that, that clicks and engagement just have no correlation with the brand metrics that actually matter: awareness, purchase intent, ad recall. It's a red herring, but it's a dangerous red herring, because we know whatever we measure, that's kind of what we optimize towards, and that's what we make decisions based on. So if we're measuring things like engagement, we're steering the ship in the wrong direction. So engagement, cross that off the list, like not something to be looking at if we're looking at brand building on social. And final thing in the crosshairs, micro-targeting, another kind of buzzword that we've seen a lot of over the last few years. This kind of quest towards personalization, and the idea that you can make a brand personalized to everyone in your target audience and say the perfect thing to them at the perfect time. Maybe that came from the Cambridge Analytica stuff a couple of years ago, although it actually looks like in retrospect their kind of the impact of Cambridge Analytica was quite overblown. It definitely did cause a swing towards micro-targeting and personalization being the way to go for marketers. But when we kind of stack that up against culture imprinting, this idea that strong brands have this place in society, that everyone thinks the same thing about the brand, everyone understands that when I order a Guinness, that I can be confident that the other people in the bar know that that's kind of a good thing to order. That is what cultural imprinting means, and that goes against this theory of market targeting. It means that we shouldn't be saying different things to different people. We have to be creating this shared vision within society. And again, like lots of kind of other evidence to show this. On Facebook particularly, but other platforms as well. All of the kind of the best results come from when you go broad to your entire potential audience and kind of put out broad pieces of messaging to them and allow it to optimize, which kind of matched up with this as well. So micro-targeting, important to note at this point that like it can be really effective at the sales activation side of things. So when you're trying to create rational messages and sell products in the short term, this can be a really good technique to do that. Potentially why it worked so well in the political campaigns. But when we're trying to build strong brands over the long term, it's just not the way to do that. So it's something we should cross off the list. So I'm sure you can kind of come up with your own conclusions as well based on what we know about marketing. There's probably other things that you can kind of that don't sit well with that. But these are the three ones I've picked out: audience growth, engagement, and micro-targeting. Three things that are red herrings and we shouldn't be looking at when we're talking about brand building. So all good, kind of slagging off all that stuff, but I think it's important to try and build that up from the ground again. If we shouldn't be looking at that stuff, what should we be looking at? Like, what is the route forward? What is best practice on social if you want to build a brand? So felt it was important to build that into a bit of a framework. So what I'm going to talk about is creative, media, and measurement. For me, the three kind of big components of social strategy. So what are you saying, where are you saying that, and to who, and how do we know whether we're being successful with it or not? And got some thoughts on each of those areas as to how we should be thinking about it. So we're going to start with creative. So what should we be saying as a brand? And I think that social is kind of a difficult place here, because whereas with other forms of marketing, you can kind of, I guess, build up to one or a few big pieces of hero creative that everyone sees, like a TV ad, for example. On social, there is an expectation that your brand is almost the sum of lots of different parts. It's the whole experience of everything you see. It's tougher to kind of think about it like in this respect. But this is how we think about it. So fame builders, big headline pieces of content that build brand fame and tell the story of your brand and make your audience feel something, and it goes to as many people as possible in your audience. This is infrequent, maybe once a year, twice a year, those big pieces of resource that you focus budget and time and energy into. Then you've got short stories, which are almost a slimmed down version of the Fame Builder. They're more regular, probably don't take as much creative resource, but aim to tell short stories, small doses of emotion about your brand on a more regular basis. And then you've got distinctive cues, which almost act as a redefined version of what always on should look like. But importantly, it's kind of less about lifestyle content, and it's more about consistently reinforcing those distinctive cues about your brand, working as those mental shortcuts that, oh yeah, I saw that Fame Builder 2 months ago, and this reminds me of the emotion that I felt when I saw that, and this is what that brand means to me, all that kind of thing. And we believe that they all work together really well. And if you're making these 3 types of creative on social, that's the best way to build your brand. So just to dig into each one of those and give you some examples to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. Fame builders, the objective here is to build brand fame. It's kind of the big headline moments, probably the role that a TV ad plays at the moment, but obviously kind of translating that feeling to social and building something that could only be built on social. Here you're prioritizing the emotional connection over the rational. You're trying to make people feel something at all costs. Like emotion is the way to do this brand building stuff. It's idea above everything, and what I mean by that is I don't think that you should be prioritizing a particular format here. You know, the best example of that is that that Nike Nothing Beats a Londoner ad from a few years ago, which obliterated all of the best practice rules about social media. It was landscape. It was like 2 minutes long. It had no subtitles or anything. No logo in the first 3 seconds. But because it was so good, it was emotional. It told a story. People flipped their phones and turned the sound on for it. So I think with these fame builders, it's all about the idea. Like, don't think about formats until you've got the perfect idea to do this. And it importantly needs to go to all the potential buyers in the category. Everyone needs to see this piece of creative, and everyone needs to know that everyone else has seen it as well. Things like view counts become quite important here, and it's at a pretty low frequency. This ad that we used in the original piece of thinking, I think it's a really good example of this from a peer here, and potentially shows as well that you don't need huge kind of corporate budgets to be able to do this stuff. It can be done by any brand really. This is their day one video about entrepreneurship and trying to make something of your business and kind of the graft it takes to do that, but why it's all worth it in the end. I think it's a really good social first version of this fame builder. And this is from Skyscanner as well, so I'm going to touch on them a bit more, but this is something that they put out just after lockdown started. So Skyscanner, travel brand, quite a difficult time to communicate for them. But they've lent hard into brand building, trying to kind of do the legwork and get that kind of emotional connection over. And they've released this fame builder style video about looking forward to the time after coronavirus and what we're going to do and where we're going to travel afterwards, which I thought was a really good example of this. Short stories kind of come in the middle. So the role here is to reinforce that brand fame. So ideally they kind of trickle down from that initial fame builder. You want to kind of do that and then follow up with lots of these. You want to tell one story very quickly. So this is when format does become a lot more important, because you're trying to get something across in quite a quick way. I think Instagram stories do work quite well here because they're built to tell a story very quickly, and they're full screen and usually have the sound on for them, so it just kind of stacks the odds in your favor for being able to do that. Medium frequency, we usually recommend kind of one a week, a couple of months here, as many as you can kind of afford to do. This is a really good example of that from the Lifeboats Association. I think the ability to tell this story and get it across in 5-6 seconds, really quite impactful, shows the power of this format, and is a really good example of this kind of short story. And also Tesco, Food Love Stories, a series that they've had going for quite a while now. It's a really good brand platform for them, and it's been working really nicely over lockdown as well. But again, getting that story across in 5 seconds, telling this story, that's what you want to be doing with these short stories. And finally, distinctive cues. So this is what we think is high frequency, almost the stuff that you're putting out on a really regular basis, but it serves a different purpose. So the purpose is to reinforce those distinctive brand assets, to kind of act as those mental shortcuts for why the brand exists and what it stands for. It's your always on. It's about imaginative repetition here. Again, the kind of thing about social is you can't just post the same thing every time. It's kind of working with assets and ideas in different ways and being creative with them. And it acts as small reminders about the brand at a high frequency. So I think Absolut do this incredibly well, using the shape of the bottle as their distinctive asset. Their feed is all around kind of imaginative repetitions of this bottle in different shapes and scenarios and places, but the bottle is always there, the outline of the bottle. I think it's a really good example of what distinctive cues should be, and kind of shows the reason for having the logo or the asset in content, but just being a bit more imaginative with it. And our view is that they need to work together. So it's not just about kind of picking and choosing different ones or having a different aesthetic for each of those things. They really need to work together. So this is how we've done it for one of our clients, Tinder. So we have used this framework to communicate their Single Not Sorry brand platform, which they've been kind of using for the last year or so. So we started with a Fame Builder. So this was a minute-long social-first piece of content that gets across that brand message. Single Not Sorry, kind of be proud of being single, make the most of it. And this works really well to kind of get that message across, build the emotional connection with our audience. Then followed that up with short stories, like a series of short stories. And here we actually worked with influencers and celebrities to tell that story for us. So kind of coming from a different angle, and getting these out using Instagram stories a couple of times a month. And then distinctive cues, the stuff that we were putting on our feed was all about using the assets, the color, the logo in interesting and social first ways, to kind of stop people's attention, get them to think about Tinder and kind of a reminder that it exists, but doing it in interesting ways that people like to engage with and kind of look at and explore. So this has worked really well for us, using these three kind of creative formats in tandem. It's really helped to drive that message home about what Tinder is and stands for. And just to bring up the Skyscanner example as well, I think they've lent really well into this brand building stuff on social over the last few months. So this Fame Builder, which we've shown before, followed up with lots of short stories. So using music and Spotify playlists to kind of get that small dose of emotion across, working with their audiences to get UGC in about kind of what's happening during lockdown and how people are spending that time. And then distinctive cues, they've kind of lent into these postcard style piece of content that kind of get the brand across, have the logo, have the distinctive assets, but are just quite interesting to look at and share, quite funny as well. So again, the three styles of content working really nicely in tandem to build and reinforce that brand. I think it will serve them really well as we come into recovery as well. So that's creative. That's what we believe you should be making on social. It's not just about posting stuff to the feed and a few stories and maybe an ad here and there. It's about being a lot more intentional about the creative you're making. What purpose is it serving? How is it building the brand? And how does it all work together? And that's how we believe you should be doing it. But we know that as social has changed and as we have to be reaching all those potential buyers, media is such an important part of that process as well. It's not enough to just make this content, put it out and see what happens. We have to be really intentional about how we're doing that and where it's going and how. So I think for brand building, media's job is really to do this as well as possible. How can we continuously reach all the buyers in the category in the best and cheapest way possible? I think there's 3 things to bear in mind here. First, reach and frequency. Second, how can we kind of hit people from as many touch points as possible? And thirdly, budget allocation. How should you be thinking about your budgets? I think there's lots more to it, obviously, but there are 3 key kind of takeaways to think about for how to build brands using media. So reach and frequency. I think this is absolutely crucial. So we know that, again, to hammer the point, in order to grow your brand, go broad, go to as many people as possible that could potentially buy the brand. That's what you need to do. But we also know that it's not really enough to just hit people once a year on social media. The research shows that the best results come when you're talking to people twice a week. That's kind of the optimum, I guess, level of impact on social, level of frequency. And these kind of conflict, right? Because the broader you go, the less times you can talk to people. That's just how the budget works. So I think a big job of media here is to balance these 2 things and get them to the right balance. So I think what we try and do is go as broad as your budget allows, like, go to as many people as possible, but also trying to make sure that you're reaching at least 80% of them 1 to 2 times a week. That's what we see as the optimum balance between these 2 things. We shouldn't be pushing too hard on one or the other. It's about the kind of equilibrium between them. Really important, almost the fundamental job of media. Secondly is this thing about compounding touch points. So lots of research, really interesting, shows that kind of when you're talking to people on multiple platforms or touch points or places, it's greater than the sum of its parts. So it kind of leads to this kind of feeling that you're seeing this brand everywhere, and that's kind of really effective in terms of brand building. I think this can be applied to social really easily. So thinking about how can we touch people on different platforms, so Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and other platforms at the same time. It might be formats. So it might be that you're using Instagram but talking to people on stories, IGTV and the feed. Kind of works as kind of 3 different places. And also creators, so using, like with the Tinder example, using influencers to kind of talk to people in a different way from a different account. All of those things can help to kind of build this effect of compounding touch points. But as we know, like, it's also about how you've used social in your wider marketing mix. If you're on your phone and see an ad from a company, and then you look up and you see it on an out of home advert, and then you get home and you see it on TV, that's what really builds this effect as well. So it's about maximizing your touch points where budget allows. And finally, in terms of thinking about budgets, I'm sure you have seen this before, but we kind of use it as a really good rule of thumb, the 60-40 split in budgets. So 60% of your media spend should be going to this longer term brand building stuff, and 40% should be going to the shorter term sales activation. And that, for most brands, is where you start to get the best results. And in their recent piece of research, Burnett and Field, they actually kind of, I guess, gave more specific recommendations for how you should split it based on your category and your context. So I'd definitely recommend having a look at that. But if you're only doing like 60-40, that's better than most brands. It's kind of takes a lot of buy-in from different stakeholders, and it kind of it is not easy to get there. But I think it's really important that we do that with spending 60% of budgets, building this equity for the long term. That's how we really get to great. So that's media, kind of balancing reach and frequency, compounding your touch points, and making sure you're spending at least 60% of your budget on brand. But the most important part of the puzzle is measurement, because as we know, the things that we choose to measure are kind of what everyone will optimize towards, and the content we'll make, and the media, how we'll spend our media budgets. If we're not measuring the right things, it's going to be a real struggle. So, and this is where social traditionally falls down the most, because it's very easy to look at the instant things like likes and shares, comments, followers. Kind of the platforms point you towards those things, but they just don't measure any of this stuff in the right way. So how we think about it, we kind of think about the two areas I just talked about, creative and media. And with creative, we're thinking about, is it doing that brand building job for us? Are we building that emotional impact? Are we being distinctive? Are we building fame? A couple of ways we like to measure that. There's no one perfect metric to do this yet, but we kind of, a balanced scorecard approach is the way to go. So brand lift studies are pretty good for this stuff, because they allow you to kind of ask those specific questions about the emotion you felt, about the distinctiveness, about the fame, and kind of use test and control things to really isolate the impact of the creative. Recall lift is a not perfect, but better than the usual stuff way to measure the kind of distinctiveness and the kind of how good your ads are at building that distinctiveness. And through play as well is also an interesting thing to look at for those bigger fame builder style pieces of content, where you want to get people to watch for at least half of the video. Through play is a good metric of that. And then media is more about the efficiency side of things. So are we reaching enough for those people? Are we reaching them at the right frequency? So that balance we talked about, is it in balance? And are we doing that at the right cost, the cheapest possible cost? So looking at the amount of reach, like take all of the people who could potentially buy the product, what percentage of them are we reaching? Are we getting them at the right frequency? So that 1 to 2 a week being a good thing to aim for, but it depends on budgets. And is our CPM at the right cost? Are we getting this in the most efficient way as possible? And balancing these two things, which could be seen as conflicting, is like the way to really get good at measuring this stuff. And importantly, tracking it all over a period of like at least 6 months, ideally longer. We know this brand building stuff takes time, and you're not going to see instant results from it. So it's about having the confidence to get beyond just the day-to-day stuff that's coming in and really view this on the longer term. So loads of stuff in there. Just wanted to clarify that down and make sure it's kind of understood. So creative, we would recommend fame builders, short stories, and distinctive cues being the 3 things that you should make on social. Media is about balancing reach and frequency. It's about hitting people from multiple touch points if you can, and starting with 60-40. And measurement is about measuring the hard stuff, not just the easy bits. It's not about just looking at the instant things. You need to be more effortful and intentional with the things that you're measuring. And finally, I guess just to address the elephant in the room, a lot of the questions we've been getting recently is around, I guess, how this all stacks up in the time of coronavirus and everything else that's going on in the world right now. Our view on it is that this framework is still the thing. It is built on kind of almost timeless laws of marketing, but the way that brands should be thinking about the execution in each of these areas is different, like has had to adapt. So within creative, for example, I think what we've really learned, it's always been true, but it's kind of been under a microscope over the last few months, is that brands taking action is more important than the thing you communicate after that. It's about kind of taking real world action and then potentially communicating it rather than the other way around. It's really important. And potentially moving away from this aspirational Instagram aesthetic, kind of painting this aspirational lifestyle towards more of a real form of comms, solidarity, standing with the audience. That has become much more important, and aspirational stuff has perhaps become a bit tone deaf over the last few months. Media, we've seen a real shift towards I guess more active forms of social, so things like groups and live streams and all that kind of stuff. I think that should play a key role in media plans. We should be prioritizing those formats, and thinking heavily about context. Things like brand safety has always been on the agenda, but in times like these, it really is crucial to be thinking about that stuff. I think in terms of measurement, it really is crunch time. In an economic sense, it's hard to fight for long-term groundwork style comms and advertising, but actually it's most important right now. So it really will test a lot of marketers in standing up for this stuff. But that's just our view on how this all, I guess, applies to what's happened over the last few months. And that's it. Just gave a lot of information across. So hopefully that was helpful and interesting. But we'd love to take any questions or thoughts or anything now.
Thanks, Callum. That was great. So many questions coming in. We've got next to no chance of getting through them all, but keep sending them in. And like I said, there's an email address you can get a hold of us. The first one that has come up quite a few times was around, you've kind of haven't really talked too much about different social channels throughout this presentation, and whether there should be a different are there specific channels that are particularly good or particularly poor for brand building in this type of activity, and how you blend them? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, good, really good question. Something we've definitely thought about a lot. The thing you have to balance is the amount of scale that platforms give you. So Facebook and Instagram, simply because they're used by the most amount of people in the UK, are usually good places to start with this stuff, because you can go broad enough without having to kind of get too clever with targeting. But if you're a brand who has a more specific pool of buyers, and that pool of buyers matches up with a platform like Twitter or TikTok or Snapchat, then that can perform that role as well. So I think for most brands, we still think Facebook and Instagram are the places where you'll get, I guess, most scale, and then explore other platforms. But it really depends on matching up your audience with the audience of the platform.
Great. And there have been quite a few questions on from a perspective of small businesses or startups, or particularly businesses that right now are in survival mode because of COVID-19. How does any of this bend for businesses like that? Like, what are the most important bits? How do you make a case to a founder or a CEO for whom short-term results are the thing that will enable them to raise their next round of money, or kind of allow the business to continue? Yeah,
amazing question. Like, I've thought about it a lot as well, and it's definitely something that we talk to our clients a lot about. Something I'm really interested in pushing for that kind of that scenario is how we can blend the two forms of marketing. So can you create emotional forms of content that also have a rational call to action at the end of them, and you can measure both things and do both things? I think social is quite unique in that you can blend the two. Things like shoppable tags and even just links in it and swipe ups. I think you can merge the two forms of marketing. It's not going to be as effective as doing them differently. But I think in times like these, where budgets are under pressure and that is a thing we have to fight for, that would be my advice. Tell a story, give a rational end to it, and try and do them both at the same time. I think that would be my advice.
Yeah, that's great. There's plenty more, but with one eye on time, I think it's probably best that we tie up. Thank you, Callum, for taking us through that. Fascinating as always, and I've heard it plenty of times. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Like I said, the best way to get hold of us is through our website, through our email address, shout@bornsocial.co.uk. Or we're obviously on pretty much every social channel out there. So if you would like to put one of the questions that you've submitted or anything else that's come up to Callum or anyone Born, we would love to hear from you in the next few days. Like I said at the start, we will be sending around the slides and the recording of this later today or tomorrow, as soon as we can. Yeah, I think that is pretty much everything. So have a great Thursday, and thanks again for joining.
Thanks everyone.